A vast ocean separated three continents, yet their most powerful leaders shared the same treasures. For centuries before the Common Era, a hidden economy moved luxury goods across the Indian Ocean, linking the kingdoms of Africa, Arabia, and India in a web of astonishing sophistication. This was not trade in food or cloth, but in objects of pure desire, lightweight, incredibly valuable, and utterly exotic. These items could justify the perilous journey across open water and shifting sands. Understanding this network completely reshapes our view of the ancient world. It reveals a form of globalization that flourished long before the Silk Road, built on the ambitions of African, Arabian, and Indian empires. By the end of this exploration, you will see the map of antiquity not as isolated civilizations, but as a single, interconnected marketplace. How did merchants navigate thousands of miles without modern tools? And what dark compromises fueled this glittering exchange? The story of this network is a testament to human ingenuity and its complex cost. What does it mean for a society to build its wealth on things it cannot eat, wear, or live in? This intricate web of commerce has a name we can finally give it: the Indian Ocean Trade. But to understand its true nature, we must zoom in on a specific, crucial circuit within that vast system. Our story focuses on the Western Indian Ocean, a triangle of immense power and desire. Picture one point anchored in the Horn of Africa, a land shrouded in legend, known to Egyptians as the land of Punt. Another point rests in southern Arabia, home to the fabled kingdoms of Saba and Himyar, builders of towering dams and incense empires. The third point lies across the water in western India, a region of bustling ports fed by the wealth of the Indus River and the vibrant Tamil kingdoms further south. This was the Golden Triangle, for roughly 500 years, spanning from the last few centuries before the Common Era into the first few centuries after it. This circuit thrived. It was a period of peak activity, a time when empires and kingdoms were consolidating power, seeking not just territory but prestige. This network operated in a world before the major monotheistic religions reshaped political landscapes, a window of ancient globalization driven by pure, calculated ambition. The goods that traveled these routes were not for common markets. They were destined for palaces, for temples, for the very symbols of royal and divine authority. So what were these objects that could compel sailors to risk the monsoon winds and merchants to traverse barren deserts? The answer lies in the nature of desire itself. The true genius of this system lay in its brutal economic logic. You could not fill a ship's hold with wheat or timber and expect to turn a profit on a voyage lasting months. The weight would be immense, the spoilage total, and the value at the destination far too low to cover the staggering risk. So ancient merchants solved this puzzle with a kind of alchemy. They traded in weightlessness, they traded in stories, they traded in condensed prestige. A single amphora of fragrant resin, a small bundle of rare animal pelts, a handful of luminous pearls. These items held a value per ounce that was almost magical. This was the core principle, the economic engine that made the Indian Ocean Circuit hum. It was a trade built entirely on desire, on the insatiable need of emerging elites to display a power that was not local but global. Think of a king in southern Arabia. His authority rests on controlling the frankincense trees that grow in his arid highlands. This is his source of wealth. But to solidify his rule, he needs more. He needs symbols that his rivals cannot obtain. So his merchants sail east to India, carrying this precious incense. There, they trade it for things Arabia cannot produce: like lustrous pearls from the Gulf or intricate ivory carvings from Africa. The Indian ruler, in turn, gifts that rare Arabian incense to his own temple priests, binding their loyalty to his throne with a scent literally worth its weight in gold. This was not mere shopping, it was high-stakes political theater. Every exchange was a performance of reach and sophistication. The luxury good was a token in a silent conversation between powers, a way of saying, "My influence stretches farther than yours." The profit margins had to be astronomical to justify the journey. A merchant might risk his life and his entire fortune on one monsoon crossing. If he succeeded, the return could elevate his family for generations. This potential fueled incredible innovation in shipbuilding and navigation. But it also required safe spaces to conduct business, neutral ground where rival kingdoms could engage in commerce without conflict. This gave rise to the concept of ports of trade. These were not always bustling cities belonging to one empire. Often, they were designated zones on coastlines or islands, governed by strict protocols of neutrality. Here, the African, the Arab, and the Indian merchant could meet, barter, and depart, their precious cargoes changing hands in a ritual as delicate as the diplomacy it supported. The entire system was a precarious balance of greed and protocol, where the most valuable thing traded was often not the object itself, but the proof of connection it provided. Among these condensed treasures, one stood as a symbol of ultimate prestige, flowing out of the African continent like white gold. This was ivory. The dense, creamy tusks of elephants, sourced from the vast herds roaming the interior savannas and the forested coasts, became Africa's signature export to the ancient world. Its value was not merely in its rarity, but in its perfect material qualities. Ivory is dense yet carvable, accepting intricate detail while possessing a warm, luminous glow that seems to hold light within it. In the hands of master artisans, this African resource was transformed into objects of breathtaking beauty and profound meaning. It was shaped into delicate bracelets and hairpins for elite women, carved into elegant legs for luxurious furniture in royal palaces, and meticulously formed into sacred statues and religious idols for temples. Its journey from a living creature in the African bush to an object of veneration in a distant temple encapsulates the very essence of this long-distance trade. For kingdoms in India and later the Roman Empire, African ivory represented the pinnacle of exotic craftsmanship. It spoke of a supply chain that stretched into a mysterious and powerful continent, a tangible piece of a faraway land's wealth. This established Africa for centuries as the premier source of this magical material for markets across the Indian Ocean and beyond, a dominance it held long before Mediterranean workshops began to seek alternative sources from India. The elephant, in a profound irony, became an unwilling architect of intercontinental connection, its tusks carrying the cultural aspirations of empires on their backs. But ivory was not the only treasure flowing from Africa's shores. The continent's wealth was astonishingly diverse, each item carrying a unique form of power. Consider gold, a metal that has mesmerized humanity for millennia. While the famous mines of Nubia supplied Egypt for centuries, the gold that fueled the Indian Ocean trade likely came from sources further south, perhaps from the Great Plateau that would one day become the heart of the Zimbabwe civilization. This was not mined in vast, open pits as we think of today, but painstakingly gathered from riverbeds and shallow deposits. Its journey to the coast was a story in itself, passed from hand to hand through networks of local traders until it reached the bustling entrepôts on the Swahili coast or the Horn of Africa. There, in the form of dust, nuggets, or perhaps simple ingots, it was weighed and traded, destined to be transformed into coinage in distant empires or into breathtaking jewelry that adorned the elite of Arabia and India. Gold was the ultimate liquid asset, a compact, universal symbol of wealth that transcended language and culture. Its very presence in a transaction elevated the entire exchange, signaling a trade of monumental importance. Yet perhaps the most evocative African exports were not solid at all, but ephemeral. They were cents. The Horn of Africa, that strategic peninsula jutting into the Indian Ocean, was a critical supplier in the legendary incense trade. While the finest frankincense and myrrh trees grew in southern Arabia, these precious resins were also sourced from the African side of the Red Sea. The arid landscapes of Somalia and Ethiopia produced their own high-quality aromatics, making the region a dual powerhouse. Imagine the docks of an ancient port. The air is thick not just with salt and seaweed, but with the warm, piney scent of frankincense and the deeper, more medicinal aroma of myrrh, piled in resinous tiers in woven baskets. These substances were worth more than their weight in gold because of their role in ritual. They were burned in temples from Babylon to Rome, used in embalming practices, and prized as medicines and perfumes. To control the incense trade was to hold a monopoly on the very smell of the divine and the royal. By supplying these aromatics, Africa was not just exporting a commodity, it was exporting sanctity itself, providing the material essence for ceremonies that connected humanity to the gods. This placed the kingdoms of the Horn at the absolute center of a spiritual economy that spanned oceans. Yet Africa's exports extended beyond raw materials and sacred scents into the realm of living, breathing prestige. The ancient world held a deep fascination for exotic fauna, and African kingdoms capitalized on this demand by exporting live animals across the Indian Ocean. Baboons, with their human-like behaviors, were sought for royal menageries, living collections meant to display a ruler's dominion over all the earth's wonders. Cheetahs, symbols of speed and grace, were trained for the hunt in foreign courts. Even young elephants, though immensely difficult to transport, were occasionally sent as the ultimate diplomatic gift, a walking testament to the sender's power and reach. These creatures were not mere pets, they were animated luxury goods, their presence in a foreign palace a constant, spectacular reminder of the king's global connections. This trade in wildlife, while a testament to the logistical prowess of ancient merchants, also reveals a world-view where nature itself was a commodity to be collected and displayed by the elite. This network of desire, however, was built upon a foundation far more troubling. The same ships and caravan routes that carried ivory, gold, and incense also facilitated a recurring and tragic movement of human beings. A complex trade in enslaved individuals was a persistent feature of this Indian Ocean system, a dark facet of the luxury economy. The scale was significant, with individuals often captured through local conflicts or raids in the African interior, then moved along established trade routes to the coast. There, African and Arabian intermediaries played roles in a system that saw people treated as another form of high-value cargo. Primary routes funneled individuals from the interior of the Horn of Africa and the Swahili coast to ports, where they were transported across the sea to markets in southern Arabia, the Persian Gulf, and western India. In these distant lands, they were often put to work in households, in ports, or in roles supporting the very luxury trades that had brought them there. It is crucial to understand this not as a separate system, but as intertwined with the flow of other goods. The profitability of spices, pearls, and textiles sometimes relied on this coerced labor, and the wealth generated from luxury sales could, in turn, fund further acquisition. Framing this within the broader network forces a difficult but necessary recognition. The glittering objects that symbolized connection and power for some were, for others, linked to a profound loss of autonomy and home. This aspect of the trade leaves a complex legacy, reminding us that the pathways of ancient globalization were paved with both extraordinary innovation and profound human hardship. To study this network is to acknowledge its full, contradictory reality. a system that could foster cultural exchange and artistic wonder while simultaneously perpetuating deep suffering. The story does not end on the African coast, of course. For every export, there was a coveted import arriving in return, goods that African elites desired just as fiercely. Across the water, another scent defined an entire civilization. If Africa's wealth was in ivory and gold, southern Arabia's power was literally in the air. The arid highlands of what is now Oman and Yemen were home to a botanical treasure so precious it shaped empires, the frankincense and myrrh trees. These gnarled, unassuming shrubs produced resins that became the most coveted aromatics of the ancient world, creating a monopoly that lasted for centuries. The kingdoms of Saba and later Himyar did not just trade these resins, they controlled them, from the sap in the bark to the final destination thousands of miles away. Harvesting this treasure was a ritual in itself. In regions like Dhofar and Hadramaut, skilled harvesters would make precise cuts in the bark of the Boswellia trees for frankincense and the Commiphora trees for myrrh. The trees would weep a milky sap that hardened upon contact with the dry desert air into translucent tears. These tears were then carefully gathered by hand, a process requiring deep knowledge of the trees to avoid killing them. This was not farming in a traditional sense. It was a sustainable, generations-old partnership with a fragile landscape. The real alchemy, however, happened once the resin left the tree. The harvested tears were loaded onto the backs of camels, beginning a long, perilous journey north along routes that would become legendary, known collectively as the Incense Road. These were not mere paths, but meticulously maintained commercial highways through some of the most forbidding deserts on Earth. Caravans of thousands of camels, moving in single file, created a slow-moving river of wealth across the sands. They carried the incense to ports on the Red Sea, where it was shipped to Egypt and the Mediterranean, or eastward to the Persian Gulf and India. The value skyrocketed with every mile. By the time a bundle of frankincense reached a temple in Rome or a market in Babylon, it could be worth many times its weight in silver. This value was rooted in belief. Frankincense, when burned, produced a sweet, clean smoke believed to carry prayers directly to the gods. Myrrh, with its deeper, more bitter aroma, was sacred for anointing and preservation. From the temples of Jerusalem to the ceremonies of the Roman emperors, from the healing rituals of Ayurvedic practitioners in India to the funerary rites of pharaohs, these Arabian resins were the universal language of the sacred. They were also considered potent medicines used to treat everything from inflammation to anxiety. This demand created staggering wealth. The fabled Queen of Sheba, a ruler of Saba, was not a myth but a testament to this economic reality. The taxes and tariffs levied on every camel train funded the construction of magnificent cities like Marib with its great dam and enabled the Sabaeans to project power across the region. Their control over the scent of sanctity made them indispensable, turning a barren landscape into the engine of one of history's most enduring and fragrant empires. The frankincense trade was just the beginning of Arabia's aromatic empire. Beyond the sacred resins, another substance of immense value flowed from its ports, a dark, fragrant heartwood known as aloeswood or agar wood. This was not a resin but the product of a diseased tree, a rare infection in the Aquilaria species that caused the wood to produce a dense, resin-saturated core with an incredibly complex and long-lasting scent. When burned, it released a profound, sweet, and slightly smoky aroma that was prized even above frankincense in many Eastern courts. In places like India and China, aloeswood was the ultimate luxury in perfumery and medicine, believed to calm the mind and elevate spiritual practices. Arabian merchants, with their access to sources in the mountainous regions of southern Arabia, and their trade links to Southeast Asia where the finest agar wood grew, became the primary suppliers of this olfactory treasure to the Western Indian Ocean world. Their control over this good reinforced their image as the gatekeepers of rare and mystical fragrances, masters of an economy built on the senses. This mastery extended to a spice that became synonymous with Arabia itself, despite the fact it never grew there. Cinnamon, with its warm, sweet bark, was one of the most legendary commodities of antiquity. For centuries, Mediterranean and Indian buyers believed it was an Arabian product, harvested from mysterious trees in the land of the Sabaeans. The truth was far more revealing of the network's sophistication. The true source of high-quality cinnamon was the distant island of Sri Lanka and the coasts of Southeast Asia. Arabian merchants, however, were the crucial middlemen in a breathtakingly long supply chain. They would acquire cinnamon from Southeast Asian traders in Indian ports, or perhaps through direct voyages using the monsoon winds, and then bring it back to their home ports in southern Arabia. From there, it was marketed as an exotic Arabian spice, its origins shrouded in deliberate mystery to maintain high prices and an aura of exclusivity. The markup was extraordinary, transforming a bark from a tropical forest into a spice worth a fortune in Rome or Persia. This was not deception in a simple sense, it was brilliant branding. By controlling the final leg of the journey into the Mediterranean and Western Indian markets, Arabian merchants inserted themselves as the indispensable link to the distant, wondrous East. Their reputation as spice masters was built on this logistical genius, on their ability to navigate not just oceans, but information, keeping the true origins of their goods a closely guarded commercial secret. This role as both producer and middleman gave them unparalleled leverage. They could offer the genuine aloes wood from their own hinterlands alongside the transshipped cinnamon of Sri Lanka, creating a portfolio of luxuries that no other region could match. In doing so, they turned the Arabian Peninsula into more than a land of incense. It became the world's ancient spice hub, a place where the scents and flavors of entire continents converged before being sent out to captivate distant kingdoms. While Arabia mastered the world of scent, India captivated it with color, texture, and flavor. The subcontinent's luxury exports were not singular treasures, but vast, diverse categories that became woven into the daily life and grand ceremonies of foreign empires. Foremost among these were textiles, fabrics so fine they were legendary. Indian weavers, particularly in the Gangetic Plains and the southern regions, achieved a level of craftsmanship that seemed almost supernatural to outsiders. They produced cotton muslins of such incredible delicacy that an entire garment could be pulled through a simple finger ring. These fabrics, often dyed in vibrant, lasting colors using complex techniques with plants like indigo and madder, were not just clothes, they were statements. A Roman patrician wearing a tunic of Indian muslin was displaying more than wealth, he was displaying access to a global network. This cloth was lightweight, perfect for warm climates, and exotically beautiful, making it a coveted status symbol across the Roman world, from the forums of Rome to the villas of Alexandria. The demand was so intense that Roman commentators lamented the vast sums of silver flowing east to pay for these silks and cottons, worrying over a trade imbalance that drained imperial coffers for what they saw as sheer vanity. But this was not vanity alone, it was the power of perceived perfection. Indian textiles set the standard, defining luxury for an entire hemisphere. Alongside these flowing fabrics came the treasures that defined taste itself, the spices. India was the ancient world's spice cabinet, producing a dazzling array that drove commerce and cuisine. Black pepper, often called black gold, was the most famous, a staple for both preserving and flavoring food from Rome to China. But the variety was staggering: cardamom with its sweet, eucalyptus-like aroma, ginger with its fiery warmth, turmeric with its earthy color and medicinal properties, and cinnamon, which Indian merchants also traded after acquiring it from further east. These were not mere seasonings, they were essential technologies. In an era before refrigeration, spices like pepper helped mask the taste of aging meat and were believed to have preservative qualities. More importantly, they were foundational to entire medical systems. In Ayurveda, India's ancient science of life, ginger was used for digestion, turmeric for healing, and countless others were compounded into remedies. This dual role in the kitchen and the clinic created a relentless, inelastic demand. A Roman noble might forego a new tunic, but he would still need pepper for his table and his physician's prescriptions. This made the spice trade astonishingly resilient, a constant flow of wealth back to the Indian ports. The kingdoms of South India, like the Cholas and the Cheras, grew powerful by controlling these hinterlands of flavor, taxing the trade that moved from inland plantations to coastal harbors like Muziris. There, on the Malabar coast, sacks of peppercorns would be loaded onto Arabian and Roman ships, their pungent scent mixing with the salt air, destined to make distant meals more palatable and distant lives, in the minds of those who consumed them, more luxurious and more secure. The exchange was now complete, a triangle of desire where African ivory met Arabian incense and Indian cloth, each continent offering the others something they could not produce, yet could not live without. India's wealth, however, was not woven solely from cloth and spice. Deep within its ancient earth lay treasures of a different kind, treasures that captured light and held an edge. From the riverbeds and mines of the Deccan Plateau came gemstones of legendary quality. Diamonds, first discovered in the alluvial soils of the Golconda region, held a mystique unlike any other stone. Their unmatched hardness and brilliant fire made them symbols of invincibility and eternal power, coveted by rulers for royal scepters and ceremonial jewelry. Sapphires from Kashmir, with their deep, velvety blue, were likened to fragments of the night sky, while vibrant carnelian from Gujarat, with its warm reddish hue, was carved into intricate seals and beads that traveled as far as Rome and Mesopotamia. These stones were more than decoration, they were functional art. A carnelian seal, pressed into clay or wax, authenticated a document with the unique mark of its owner, making it a tool of bureaucracy and identity. The value lay in their perfect imperfection, each stone a unique product of geological chaos, transformed by a master cutter into a symbol of order and status. This trade in light and color required immense skill, not just in mining, but in the precise art of gem cutting, a knowledge that Indian artisans guarded closely, adding another layer of crafted value to the raw gift of the earth. Yet perhaps India's most astonishing export was one that combined artistry with terrifying utility. In the crucibles of southern India, particularly in the Tamil region, metallurgists perfected a material that would become the stuff of legend, Wootz steel. This was not ordinary iron. Through a sophisticated process of melting iron with precise amounts of carbon in a sealed clay crucible, then cooling it slowly, they created a high-carbon steel ingot with a distinctive, mottled surface pattern. These ingots, known as Wootz cakes, were themselves a luxury commodity, shipped west to centers like Damascus in Syria. There, master smiths would forge and refold this Indian steel into blades of extraordinary performance. The resulting swords, later known as Damascus blades, were famed for their resilience, their ability to hold a razor-sharp edge, and their beautiful, watery surface pattern, a direct result of the unique microstructure of the Indian steel. This was a technological luxury good of the highest order. A warrior wielding a sword made from Indian Wootz steel carried not just a weapon, but a masterpiece of intercontinental innovation. It spoke of a supply chain that spanned thousands of miles, from the iron ore mines of India to the forges of the Middle East, culminating in an object that could mean the difference between life and death on the battlefield. In this way, India exported not just beauty, but a form of perfected power, proving that in the ancient world, the ultimate luxuries were those that enhanced both splendor and strength. These treasures did not simply drift across the ocean on their own. they moved on vessels that were themselves marvels of ancient engineering, ships perfectly adapted to the unique challenges of the Indian Ocean. The workhorse of this entire network was the Dhow. This was not a single type of ship, but a family of wooden sailing vessels whose design evolved over centuries to become the ultimate long-distance cargo carrier of its age. What made the Dhow so revolutionary was its elegant response to two fundamental problems: how to build a strong yet flexible hull, and how to harness the capricious power of the wind. The Dhow's most distinctive feature, the one that catches the eye even today, was its sail. Unlike the square sails common in the Mediterranean, which primarily caught winds from behind, the Dhow used a triangular lateen sail. This ingenious design was a game-changer. Mounted on a long, sloping yardarm, the lateen sail could be angled with remarkable precision. It allowed sailors to sail much closer to the direction of the wind, to tack against it in a zigzag pattern. This meant a Dhow was not simply at the mercy of a favorable breeze. It could make progress even when the wind was not perfectly behind it, granting sailors a level of control and freedom that opened up new maritime possibilities. The sail's shape also made it easier to reef or reduce in size during sudden storms, a critical safety feature when caught in open water. The hull's construction was equally innovative. Many early Dhows were not built with nails or pegs, but were literally stitched together. Artisans would drill holes along the edges of wooden planks and lash them securely to the ship's frame with cords made from coconut fiber or other tough materials. This technique, known as stitch plank or sewn boat construction, might seem fragile, but it granted the hull a vital flexibility. When pounding through heavy monsoon swells, a stitched hull could twist and give slightly, absorbing stresses that would crack a rigid, nailed hull apart. The seams were then caulked with a mixture of coconut fiber and resins to make them watertight. This was shipbuilding that worked in harmony with the forces of the sea, not against them. But the greatest force these sailors learned to master was not the wood or the sail, but the rhythm of the sky itself. The entire annual cycle of trade was governed by the predictable, powerful monsoon winds. For roughly half the year, from April to September, the winds blow steadily from the southwest, pushing ships from the Arabian coast toward India and Africa. Then, as if on a celestial schedule, the winds reverse. From October to March, the northeast monsoon blows, carrying those same ships back home. Ancient mariners did not fight this cycle, they built their lives around it. A merchant in southern Arabia would load his Dhow with incense in the spring, catch the southwest monsoon to India, spend several months trading and waiting for the winds to shift, and then catch the northeast monsoon back, his hold now full of pepper and textiles. This turned commerce into a seasonal pulse. Ports would swell with activity during the sailing windows, humming with the sounds of loading and negotiation, then grow quiet during the intervening months. Settlements along the coast were founded with this rhythm in mind, their economies tied to the comings and goings of the monsoon fleets. To miss the seasonal window meant being stranded in a foreign port for half a year, a delay that could mean financial ruin. So the knowledge of the monsoon was more than meteorology. It was the central clock of this entire world, a natural metronome that set the pace for empire, profit, and connection across thousands of miles of blue water. The true map of this ancient trade was not drawn on parchment, but etched into memory and the night sky. For the merchants and sailors who piloted these fragile Dhows across vast, featureless stretches of water, technology was not found in a tool but in the mind itself. They navigated by a living library of environmental clues, an oral tradition passed from master to apprentice over generations. This knowledge was their most guarded treasure, a form of intellectual capital as vital to survival as the cargo in the hold. They learned to read the stars with an intimacy we have largely forgotten. The North Star, Polaris, provided a fixed northern anchor. but they also mapped the rising and setting points of countless other constellations across the seasons, creating a celestial calendar that guided their timing. They observed the subtle shifts in ocean swells, understanding how wave patterns changed as they approached land or shallow reefs, a skill that could mean the difference between a safe harbor and a shattered hull. The flight paths of certain seabirds became crucial signposts. Spotting a tern or a booby at a specific distance from shore could tell an experienced sailor he was within a day's sail of an island, even when no land was visible on the horizon. This was a holistic science of observation, where the color of the water, the shape of the clouds, and even the types of driftwood floating by contributed to a constantly updating mental chart. The pilot was not just a sailor, he was a naturalist, an astronomer, and a poet of the sea, interpreting a language written in wind, water, and light. This expertise was concentrated and curated in the bustling, cosmopolitan ports that dotted the coasts. Settlements like Qana on the Arabian Peninsula or Muziris on the Malabar coast of India were more than markets. They were living databases. Here, ship captains from Africa, Arabia, India, and even occasionally from the Roman world would gather. In waterfront inns and on shaded docks, they exchanged not just goods but information. They shared stories of newly discovered reefs, debated the timing of the monsoon's shift, and passed on tales of safe anchorages and friendly local rulers. A Somali sailor might describe a current along the East African coast to an Indian merchant, who would in turn share his knowledge of a profitable but tricky inlet on the Arabian shore. This constant, informal exchange created a pooled body of knowledge that was greater than any single culture's understanding. The port community itself became the guardian of this collective wisdom. Elders and renowned pilots were revered figures, their memories serving as the community's most valuable infrastructure. Losing such a person was akin to losing a lighthouse. This system ensured that the routes remained open, the knowledge stayed current, and the network itself could endure beyond the lifespan of any one ship or empire. In a world without satellites or compasses, trust in shared experience and accumulated observation was the invisible thread that stitched the map together, proving that the most durable connections are often those woven from stories and careful attention to the world. The true test of a trade network lies not in the ships but in the cities they built. Where the Red Sea meets the African continent, a harbor once thrived as the beating heart of this entire system. This was Adulis, the primary seaport for one of the ancient world's most formidable yet often overlooked empires, the Kingdom of Axum. For centuries, Adulis was more than a dock, it was a colossal funnel. Through its well-protected harbor flowed the wealth of the African interior and the desires of the wider world. Its infrastructure was a testament to organized, state-sponsored commerce. Warehouses of mud brick and stone lined the waterfront, storing tusks of ivory, sacks of aromatic resins, ingots of gold, and exotic animal hides before they were loaded onto waiting dhows. Freshwater springs nearby supplied the ships and the settlement, a critical resource that made Adulis a reliable haven in an arid region. In return, the port received a flood of imports, Roman glassware and wine, fine textiles from India, and silver coinage from Mediterranean mints, all destined for the inland capital. The city itself was a bustling, cosmopolitan hub where Greek, Egyptian, Arab, and Axumite merchants negotiated under the same sun, their transactions recorded in multiple languages, a noisy, vibrant monument to global connection. But Adulis was merely the mouth. The brain, the seat of imperial power, lay several days' journey inland atop the highlands of northern Ethiopia. This was the city of Axum itself. The connection between port and capital was the empire's lifeline, a well-guarded caravan route that climbed from the coastal plain up into the cool, fertile highlands. This was how an African kingdom leveraged trade for transcendent power. The taxes and tariffs collected at Adulis provided the Axumite kings with a revenue stream of staggering proportions. They did not merely spend this wealth, they monumentalized it. They invested it in stone, transforming their capital into a spectacle meant to rival Rome or Persia. The most iconic symbols of this ambition are the great stelae, towering, carved obelisks of solid granite that still stand sentinel over the ancient city. The largest of these, now fallen, once rose over 100 feet high, a single piece of rock quarried, transported, and erected with engineering skill that baffles modern observers. These were not mere monuments, they were statements in stone, proclaiming Axum's divine right kingship and its place among the global powers. The wealth also funded grand palaces with intricate foundations, advanced irrigation systems for agriculture, and a distinctive coinage that carried the image of the Axumite ruler, a bold declaration of economic sovereignty. By minting their own gold, silver, and copper coins inscribed in Greek and Jais, Axum did something remarkable. It inserted itself directly into the monetary systems of the Mediterranean and Indian Ocean worlds, demanding that its currency be recognized as legitimate tender across networks it helped sustain. This was the ultimate power move, transforming raw trade wealth into a sophisticated tool of statecraft and international prestige. Through Adulis and Axum, we see a complete picture, an African empire that did not just participate in the luxury exchange, but mastered it, using the goods of the world to forge an enduring legacy of its own. Across the sea, the Arabian coastline pulsed with its own vital harbors, each serving as a specialized valve in the great engine of trade. In the eastern reaches of modern-day Yemen, nestled where the arid mountains met the turquoise water of the Arabian Sea, lay the port of Qana. This was not a general marketplace, it was a dedicated temple to a single substance. Qana served as the principal maritime outlet for the entire inland incense kingdom of Hadramaut. Here, the slow river of camel caravans from the interior finally reached its destination. The air in Qana would have been permanently perfumed, thick with the resinous scent of frankincense and myrrh piled high in warehouses awaiting export. The port's entire economy was organized around transformation, turning solid lumps of precious sap into shippable, taxable cargo. Officials weighed and assessed the quality of each bundle, stamping it and levying the royal tariffs that funded the Sabaean and Himyarite dynasties. From Qana's docks, the incense was loaded onto sturdy dhows whose captains knew the monsoon rhythms intimately. Their holds filled, these ships would catch the favorable winds to carry Arabia's sacred fragrance east to the ports of India, or south and west to the markets of Africa and the entrance to the Red Sea. Qana was a place of focused purpose where the wealth of the desert was methodically transferred to the domain of the sea. Several hundred miles to the west along the Red Sea coast, a different kind of port thrived. This was Muza, a bustling, raucous hub that served as the commercial gateway for the kingdom of Himyar. If Qana was a dedicated temple, Muza was a grand bazaar. It acted as the primary collection point for goods not just from the nearby highlands, but from a vast hinterland. Caravans arrived here laden with the prized aromatic gums, but also with cinnabar, the brilliant red pigment used in dyes and cosmetics, and the legendary aloes wood. Muza's true character, however, came from its role as an import center. It was here that the ships returning from Africa and India unloaded their exotic cargoes. The docks were a spectacle of convergence. You would hear a cacophony of languages from Sabaean and Greek to Tamil and Jais. Merchants from Alexandria haggled over parcels of Malabar pepper, while Himyarite officials inspected ivory tusks that had journeyed from the African savanna. The city's warehouses held stacks of Indian cotton cloth next to amphorae of Roman wine, and its markets displayed African tortoiseshell and gold dust alongside pottery from the Mediterranean. Muza was a true multicultural marketplace, a noisy, vibrant melting pot where the luxury goods of 3 continents were sorted, traded, and redistributed. It was a place where a trader from the interior could exchange his local resins for a piece of fine Indian jewelry or a bolt of cloth, physically touching the distant worlds his work helped connect. These ports were the critical synapses in the network, the points where land-based wealth met maritime ambition, transforming regional commodities into the currency of intercontinental prestige. While the African and Arabian ports funneled goods to the sea, the Indian coastline was the ultimate destination, a glittering shore where everything converged. Two names dominated the maritime charts of the ancient world: Barygaza in the north and Muziris in the south. These were not just ports, they were colossal emporia, free trade zones of staggering wealth that operated with the efficiency and allure of modern global hubs. Our clearest window into their daily bustle comes from a remarkable 1st-century merchant's guide, the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea. This practical handbook, written by a Greek-Egyptian trader, reads like an ancient business travelogue, listing harbors, market prices, and local customs with brisk commercial precision. Through its eyes, we can walk the crowded wharves of these legendary cities. In the north, where the Narmada River meets the Arabian Sea, lay Barygaza, modern Baruch. The Periplus describes it as a vital gateway to the vast interior of the Indian subcontinent. Reaching its harbor, however, was a notorious challenge for foreign captains. The approach was guarded by fierce tidal bores and shifting sandbanks, requiring local pilots to board incoming ships and expertly guide them to safety. This was a controlled access, a natural filter ensuring that only those with serious business or those willing to pay the pilot's fee could enter. Once inside, a merchant found a market of breathtaking diversity. Barygaza was the primary outlet for the manufactures and resources of the powerful Gupta and Satavahana empires. Its warehouses held fine cotton cloth, the intricate muslins and brightly dyed fabrics that were in universal demand. But it also offered bulk goods like the precious teakwood from inland forests, used for shipbuilding and luxury furniture. The city exported huge quantities of a unique local product, long pepper, a spicier cousin of black pepper that was highly prized. In return, Barygaza absorbed a flood of imports tailored to Indian elite tastes: silver Roman coins, Italian wine, expensive copper, tin, and lead for metalworking, and even exotic slaves for royal households. The Periplus notes that special gifts were required for the local king: fine wines and expensive textiles, a form of diplomatic grease to smooth commercial dealings. This was a port of protocol and scale, where high-volume trade met complex political ceremony. Far to the south, on the lush Malabar coast, a different kind of port thrived. Muziris was the pepper capital of the ancient world. If Barygaza was a formal gateway, Muziris was a vibrant, chaotic, and immensely profitable marketplace. The Periplus describes it simply as a bustling port, but archaeological evidence and Roman records paint a vivid picture. Here, the air was pungent with the scent of black gold, mountains of peppercorns drying in the sun, awaiting export. Roman merchants, financed by vast syndicates, maintained permanent trading stations here. They arrived with ships laden with gold and silver coinage, primarily to exchange for pepper, but also for other South Indian treasures: pearls from the Gulf of Mannar, precious stones like sapphires and beryl, and exquisite ivory carvings that may have originated in Africa but were finished by local artisans. The integration was so deep that a temple to the Roman Emperor Augustus was established in Muziris, a startling symbol of how far commercial influence could reach. The flow of Roman silver to Muziris was so immense that historians have found hoards of Roman coins across Tamil Nadu, and Tamil poetry of the era speaks of prosperous port towns where Yavanas, the term for Greeks and Romans, brought gold and took away pepper. These two ports, Barygaza and Muziris, completed the circuit. They were the terminals where the luxury goods of Africa and Arabia were finally traded for the premier products of India, and where the wealth of the Mediterranean was physically transferred into the Indian Ocean system. In their noisy, polyglot markets, the network became real, a tangible exchange of objects that would go on to define taste, sanctify ritual, and project power in palaces thousands of miles away. Behind every ivory tusk and sack of pepper was a human hand, a calculated risk, and a carefully nurtured relationship. This vast network did not run on autopilot. It was powered by a diverse cast of merchants, agents, and middlemen whose lives were dedicated to bridging worlds. In the bustling ports of Western India, trade was often organized into powerful guilds. In Tamil regions, associations known as Managramam and Nagarata operated with remarkable sophistication. These were not just loose groups of traders, but formal corporations with their own funding, rules, and even the authority to issue commercial contracts and set standards. A Gujarati merchant from a port like Barygaza might belong to a similar guild, providing him with a network of trusted contacts, shared warehouse space, and collective bargaining power when dealing with foreign ship captains. These guilds offered a safety net, a way to pool risk on ventures where a single storm could wipe out an individual's fortune. Across the water, the Arabian trade was dominated by savvy mercantile families from kingdoms like Himyar and the Nabateans. These traders were masters of logistics, coordinating the camel caravans from the interior highlands with the sailing schedules of the Dhows. Their expertise was in knowing the true value of a tear of frankincense in a market 5,000 miles away, and in the delicate art of negotiation across cultural lines. Meanwhile, Axumite agents in ports like Adulis acted as the crucial link between the African interior and the global market. They spoke the languages of the highland producers and the coastal sailors, brokering deals for ivory and gold while acquiring imported luxuries for the Axumite elite. In this multilingual, multi-ethnic world, trust was the only currency that truly mattered. It was built in layers, often starting with the most fundamental human bond, kinship. A merchant would send a son or nephew to manage a branch of the family business in a foreign port, ensuring that the agent's loyalty was tied by blood. Shared religious practice offered another powerful glue. A Hindu merchant from Gujarat and a Buddhist trader from Sri Lanka might find common ground in a shared respect for Dharma or ethical conduct, while Jewish and later Christian merchants scattered across the network used their faith communities as a web of reliable contacts and arbitrators. For transactions that went beyond community ties, there were formal legal instruments. The Periplus mentions written contracts and the use of witnesses, and in India, the guilds themselves acted as enforcers of commercial agreements. This ecosystem of trust allowed for something remarkable: the establishment of permanent multi-ethnic merchant colonies. In a port like Muza or Muziris, you would find distinct neighborhoods where foreign traders lived for years, even generations. A quarter might be populated by Greek-Egyptian merchants, another by Tamil guildsmen, and a third by Axumite agents. These were not just temporary lodgings, but self-sustaining communities with their own places of worship, their own dietary practices, and their own leaders who acted as intermediaries with the local ruler. They learned each other's languages, adopted certain customs, and raised families in these hybrid spaces. The child of a Nabatean trader and a local woman in an Indian port might grow up fluent in Aramaic, Tamil, and the maritime jargon of the Dhow captains, becoming the ultimate middleman, a living embodiment of the network itself. These colonies were the human infrastructure of globalization, proving that long before the internet, the world was connected by a fragile, resilient web of personal relationships and mutual interest. The real work of the ocean was done by voices we rarely hear in the history books. While merchants and kings plotted the grand exchanges, the actual movement of goods relied on a floating world of multi-ethnic crews whose lives were spent in the cramped, pitching holds of Dhows. These men were not just sailors, they were a specialized society adrift. A single ship might carry a Nubian lookout from Africa, an Omani helmsman who could read the stars, and a Keralite deckhand from India who knew the secret currents of the Malabar coast. They shared a language born of necessity, a maritime jargon mixing Arabic, Persian, and local dialects, used to shout commands over the roar of wind and wave. This was a culture built on mutual survival, where a man's worth was measured by his skill with a rope or his keen eye for a changing sky, not his homeland. They faced shared, monumental risks. A snapped mast in a monsoon squall could mean being driven helplessly onto a lee shore. Illness could sweep through the close quarters of a ship with terrifying speed. The ocean showed no favoritism, it demanded cooperation from everyone on board. This forged a powerful, unspoken bond, a professional identity that transcended the lands they came from. They were first and foremost men of the sea. Guiding these ships safely into strange harbors was a role of immense prestige and responsibility, entrusted to the harbor pilot. These individuals were the living databases of the coast. A pilot based in Barygaza or Muza held in his mind a detailed, three-dimensional map of every sandbar, every tidal race, every submerged rock for miles. He would row out to meet incoming vessels, climb aboard with an air of calm authority, and take the helm from the ship's captain. For the next critical hour, the safety of the ship, its crew, and its priceless cargo rested entirely on his memory and his instincts. His knowledge was his fortune, passed down like a sacred heirloom, and his services commanded a high fee. Without him, the complex machinery of the port simply could not function. Once the ship was secured and the cargo began to move, another essential figure stepped forward, the translator. In the noisy markets of Muziris or the customs house of Adulis, a successful deal required more than just speaking two languages. It required understanding nuance, etiquette, and the unspoken rules of negotiation. A good translator was a cultural bridge. He knew that a Himyarite merchant might expect elaborate formal greetings before discussing price, while a Roman trader preferred direct, brisk bartering. He understood the subtle meanings behind gestures, the proper titles for local officials, and how to frame a rejection without causing offense. A mistranslated number or a poorly conveyed compliment could sour a relationship worth thousands of coins. These translators, often the children of mixed marriages or long-term foreign residents, were the lubricant in the gears of commerce. They moved seamlessly between worlds, their very existence proof that the network was not just about moving objects, but about forging a fragile, necessary understanding. Together, the crew, the pilot, and the translator formed the human trinity of the trade. Their shared experiences, the languages they created, and the risks they collectively endured wove a subtle but durable fabric of connection. This was a globalization built not only on desire for goods, but on the practical, day-to-day reliance of people from different shores, learning to trust one another with their livelihoods and their lives beneath the vast, indifferent sky. The goods that crossed the ocean carried more than just economic value, they carried entire ways of thinking. Beyond the ivory and incense, the most profound exchanges were intangible, a quiet revolution in words and symbols that would reshape cultures for centuries. The polyglot ports and merchant colonies created a pressing need for common tongues, languages that could bridge the gap between a Greek ship captain, an Arab trader, and a Tamil guildsman. In this linguistic marketplace, a few key languages rose to the status of lingui franci, or common commercial tongues. In the western reaches of the network, especially in ports frequented by merchants from the Roman world, Greek was the language of business. The Periplus of the Erythraean Sea was written in Greek for a reason. It was the operational manual for Mediterranean merchants entering the Indian Ocean. Meanwhile, across the Arabian Sea and into the Persian Gulf, Aramaic, with its widespread use in the powerful Parthian and later Sasanian empires, served as a vital bridge language. And in the bustling ports of India itself, various forms of Prakrit, the vernacular languages derived from Sanskrit, became the medium of commerce and administration, understood by local officials and foreign traders alike. A merchant might begin a negotiation in Greek, switch to a few phrases of Aramaic to clarify a point about caravan schedules, and finalize a price using the numbers and measurements of the local Prakrit dialect. This linguistic layering was not about fluency but about function, a practical toolkit for mutual profit. It meant that ideas, not just goods, could begin to travel. A philosophical concept from an Indian court, a medical term from a Greek text, or a legal principle from a Mesopotamian city could now hitch a ride on the same ships that carried pepper and pearls, slowly seeping into new intellectual landscapes through the constant, low hum of commercial conversation. But language was only half the story. The true signature of a civilization, its writing system, also began to voyage across the water. One of the most transformative examples of this cultural transmission is visible in the highlands of Ethiopia. The Axumite kingdom, a powerhouse in the trade network, did not develop its writing in isolation. Sometime between the 5th and 1st centuries before the Common Era, through sustained contact with merchants from southern Arabia, the Axumites adopted the South Arabian script. This was not a simple copy. They took the elegant, angular letters used to inscribe Sabaean and Minian on temple walls and adapted them over centuries into their own unique script, Jaz. The evolution is a beautiful metaphor for cultural exchange. The original South Arabian letters were consonantal, but the Axumites innovated, adding vowel markings to create a fully phonetic syllabary perfectly suited to their own language. This script, Jaz, would become the foundation of Ethiopian literature, religion, and statecraft for millennia, used to record royal chronicles, land grants, and most importantly, the sacred texts of Ethiopian Christianity. The very tool that preserved Axum's history and faith was a gift from across the sea, refined by local genius. This was not a one-way street. The influence of Indian concepts and scripts traveled even farther, riding the monsoon winds to Southeast Asia. Indian merchants, particularly from the powerful kingdoms of South India, established trading posts in places like Funan, in modern-day Cambodia and Vietnam, and Srivijaya in Indonesia. They did not come as conquerors with armies, but as traders and often as spiritual advisors. Along with cotton cloth and beads, they brought Hinduism and Buddhism, and with those religions came the cultural architecture to support them, concepts of kingship, cosmology, and law. Crucially, they also brought writing. Local elites in Southeast Asia saw immense prestige in adopting these sophisticated systems. They adapted scripts like Pallava Grantha, used in southern India, to write their own languages such as Old Malay and Old Javanese. The earliest known inscriptions in many Southeast Asian languages are not native creations, but are written in these Indian-derived scripts, recording royal decrees and religious donations. This was not a case of cultural erasure, but of selective adoption and brilliant synthesis. Southeast Asian rulers used Indian script to proclaim their own authority, and Indian religious concepts to legitimize their rule, weaving them into the existing fabric of their own animist beliefs and social structures. The magnificent temple complexes of Angkor Wat or Borobudur are the ultimate testament to this exchange, stone embodiments of Indian architectural and spiritual ideas, executed with a distinctly local vision and scale. In this way, the trade routes became conduits for the very building blocks of civilization, proving that the most valuable cargo is often the one you cannot weigh or tax, the silent, shaping power of a written word. The ships carried more than spices and silk, they carried the very architecture of belief. As merchants moved, so did their gods, their rituals, and their sacred texts, transforming the trade routes into a spiritual highway. This was a quiet, profound migration where faith hitched a ride on the same vessels that carried frankincense and ivory, forever altering the religious landscape of three continents. In the highlands of Axum, this spiritual exchange took a decisive turn. For centuries, Axumite traders in ports like Adulis had encountered Jewish merchants from Alexandria and southern Arabia, and later Christian communities scattered across the Roman world. These were not formal missionaries, but men of faith who practiced their rituals in foreign ports, their prayers and symbols a curiosity to local observers. Through these sustained contacts, the core ideas of Judaism, the belief in one God and the stories of the Hebrew scriptures, began to filter into the Axumite court. The connection solidified dramatically in the 4th century when a young Syrian Christian named Frumentius, who had been shipwrecked on the Red Sea coast and risen to a position of trust in the royal court, eventually baptized King Azana. This was not a random conversion, but the culmination of decades of exposure. The trade network had prepared the ground, bringing the ideas, the people, and the cultural openness that allowed a new faith to take root. Christianity provided the Axumite kings with a powerful new tool for legitimacy, aligning them with the sophisticated theological world of Rome and Byzantium. They adopted the cross on their coinage, replacing old pagan symbols, and began building monolithic churches carved from solid rock. The Ge'ez script, itself adapted from South Arabian letters brought by traders centuries earlier, became the vessel for translating the Bible and Christian liturgy. In this way, Axum's entire spiritual identity was reshaped by the same maritime connections that filled its royal treasuries, a testament to how commerce could redraw the map of the soul. Across the water, the spiritual currents flowed in the opposite direction. Indian Dhow sailing west to Arabian ports carried more than just pepper and gemstones. They carried the rich cosmological visions of Hinduism and Buddhism. In the bustling markets of Muza and Qana, Indian merchants would have spoken of their many gods, of karma and rebirth, and of the path to enlightenment. While these Eastern religions did not displace the indigenous polytheism of Arabia or the rising dominance of Christianity, they left a clear imprint. Archaeological finds in the region, like small statues of the Indian elephant god Ganesha, suggest that these ideas and icons found audiences, perhaps among curious local elites or within the settled Indian merchant communities themselves. The concepts were absorbed into the existing tapestry of Arabian belief, adding new threads to its complex spiritual fabric. This westward flow, however, was a gentle stream compared to the tidal wave that moved east. The same monsoon winds that carried Indian textiles to Southeast Asia carried Hindu and Buddhist missionaries, teachers, and sacred texts. Kings in places like Funan and Srivijaya did not see these foreign beliefs as a threat, but as a source of immense prestige and political power. The Indian concept of the Devaraja, the god-king, was extraordinarily appealing to local rulers seeking to consolidate their authority. By adopting Hinduism or Buddhism, a Southeast Asian chieftain could transform himself into a divine monarch, his rule legitimized by a sophisticated, written cosmology. Indian Brahmins and Buddhist monks, often traveling on merchant ships, became advisors in these courts, bringing with them the knowledge of statecraft, law, and temple architecture. The trade routes provided the literal passage for this transformation. Pilgrims from China, like the famous monk Facet, used these established maritime highways to travel to India in search of sacred Buddhist scriptures, their journeys recorded in meticulous detail that tells us as much about shipping schedules as spiritual seeking. Religious artifacts became a new category of luxury good. A beautifully carved stone Buddha from Andhra Pradesh in India, or a bronze statue of Shiva, would be commissioned by a Southeast Asian ruler and transported carefully by sea, to be installed in a new temple that blended Indian design with local artistic sensibility. The result was a fusion, not a replacement. The magnificent temple of Angkor Wat, dedicated to the Hindu god Vishnu, is covered in bas-reliefs that depict not only scenes from the Indian epic, the Mahabharata, but also the daily life and military victories of the Khmer people who built it. The trade routes did not impose a foreign faith. They offered a toolkit, a set of spiritual and artistic ideas that local cultures eagerly adapted to tell their own stories and glorify their own kings. In this silent exchange, the most valuable cargo proved to be not what glittered, but what gave meaning, connecting continents through a shared search for the divine. Roman silver flowed east like a river with no return. The staggering demand of the Roman Empire for the luxuries of the Indian Ocean became the single most powerful economic engine the network had ever known. For centuries, Rome's elite developed an insatiable appetite for the exotic goods arriving from the East, a desire that reshaped global trade and strained the empire's very treasury. This was not casual consumption, it was a societal obsession. Roman patricians draped themselves in the impossibly fine Indian muslins that were said to be woven from wind. They seasoned their feasts with Malabar pepper, preserved their food with it, and even used it as a form of currency to pay rents and taxes. Frankincense and myrrh from Arabia billowed in clouds from the altars of 1,000 temples and from the public ceremonies of the emperors themselves, who used the sacred scent to legitimize their rule. Ivory from Africa was carved into ornate furniture legs, decorative panels, and statuettes that adorned the villas of the wealthy. Each of these objects was a status symbol, a public declaration that its owner was connected to the farthest, most mysterious corners of the earth. This collective craving created a commercial suction of unprecedented force, pulling goods westward and drawing the merchants who supplied them ever closer to the source of Roman gold. The economic consequence of this craving was a persistent, alarming drain of precious metal. Rome had little to offer in return that India and Arabia desired at the same scale. Roman glassware and wine were appreciated, but they could not match the value of the shiploads of pepper, gemstones, and textiles being imported. The balance was settled in cold, hard cash. Roman merchants, often backed by large syndicates, sailed to ports like Muziris with ships whose primary cargo was silver coin, and later gold. The scale was monumental. The Roman historian Pliny the Elder, writing in the 1st century, calculated the annual drain at a staggering figure, lamenting that India, China, and Arabia together drained at least 100 million sesterces from the empire every year. He complained bitterly about the trade deficit, noting that these were luxuries for which Rome paid dearly, enriching others while depleting itself. His writings are not just a catalogue of goods, but a record of imperial anxiety, a recognition that the empire's wealth was literally sailing away to purchase the scent of sanctity and the bite of pepper. This hemorrhage of silver had real effects, contributing to currency devaluation and economic stress within the empire, even as it flooded Indian kingdoms with capital. This massive Roman demand did more than just move money. It actively reshaped the network's geography and ambition. To gain more control and cut out Arabian middlemen, Roman merchants began attempting the direct ocean crossing from the Red Sea to India. Using their knowledge of the monsoon winds, which they called Hippalus, they bypassed the traditional coastal hopping routes. A Roman captain would load his vessel at the Egyptian port of Berenice, catch the southwest monsoon, and sail straight across the open Arabian Sea to the Malabar coast in about 40 days. This was a daring, high-risk, high-reward strategy. It supercharged the volume of trade, leading to the establishment of permanent Roman trading enclaves in Indian ports. We find evidence of this integration in South Indian literature, which speaks of Yavana, or Greek and Roman, merchants bustling in the ports, and in archaeology, such as the large hoards of Roman coins found across Tamil Nadu. A whole Roman warehouse complex has been identified at the site of Patinum, likely ancient Muziris, complete with Italian wine amphorae and Roman pottery. The empire's appetite became a gravitational force, pulling the operational center of the network further east and deepening the connections between the Mediterranean and Indian worlds in ways that would have been unimaginable just a few centuries before. Rome's luxury crisis, therefore, was the Indian Ocean's golden age, proving that one civilization's economic worry could be the fuel for an entire era of global exchange. This hunger for silver and spice transformed the Horn of Africa into an empire. The Axumite kingdom was not a passive participant waiting for foreign merchants to arrive. It was an architect of the entire system. By seizing control of the critical choke points where African wealth met the sea, Axum elevated itself from a regional kingdom to a global power whose name was known from Rome to Persia. Its strategic genius lay in a simple but unshakable grip. Axum controlled the source of the goods everyone wanted, the ivory, gold, and incense flowing from the African interior, and it commanded the ports like Adulis through which all of it had to pass. This was a double monopoly that generated staggering revenue. The kingdom did not just tax this trade, it weaponized it. The clearest symbol of this ambition was not a monument but a coin. Axumite rulers took a portion of that imported gold and began minting their own currency, a bold act of economic sovereignty. These were not crude imitations. Struck in gold, silver, and bronze, Axumite coins bore the profile of the king, his name, and often Christian crosses after the kingdom's conversion. They were inscribed in Greek, the international language of commerce, a direct message to the wider world. By issuing their own money, Axum was declaring its financial independence and demanding to be treated as an equal in the complex web of international exchange. A Roman or Persian merchant could no longer think of Axum as a strange land at the edge of the map, but as a sovereign state whose currency had real, recognized value. This move transformed trade wealth into a tool of statecraft, funding a sophisticated bureaucracy, a powerful army, and those breathtaking stelae that pierced the sky over the capital city. But coinage was only one facet of Axum's diplomatic playbook. The kingdom's position made it an indispensable intermediary, a balancing power between the two great empires that bookended its world. To the north and west lay the Roman Empire and later Byzantium with its endless appetite for luxuries. To the east, across the Red Sea and the deserts, lay the Sasanian Persian Empire, a rival superpower controlling the land routes to the east. Axum skillfully engaged with both. Historical records and inscriptions show Axumite embassies being received in Constantinople, and the kingdom is mentioned in Persian sources as a force to be reckoned with. Axum did not align permanently with one side, instead leveraging its control over the sea lanes to maintain a profitable neutrality. It could, in theory, threaten to divert the flow of African goods or favor one empire's merchants over the others, giving it a quiet but significant diplomatic leverage. This active, calculated engagement shows Axum not as a remote outpost, but as a core node in the ancient world's political network. It understood that the true power derived from the luxury trade was not just in possessing beautiful things, but in controlling the pathways they traveled and the relationships they forged between distant thrones. The reality of this sprawling network is preserved not in grand monuments, but in a worn, practical manual, a single surviving document known as the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, offers us an eyewitness account from the bustling deck of a merchant ship. Written in the 1st century of the Common Era, likely by a Greek-Egyptian trader based in the bustling port of Alexandria, this text is not a history or a poem. It is a working guidebook, a captain's log meant for other merchants daring to venture into the Indian Ocean's lucrative waters. Its value lies in its stunning mundanity. The anonymous author writes with the brisk focus of a businessman, cataloging ports, local rulers, market prices, and navigational hazards with a clear goal: to minimize risk and maximize profit. He tells us which harbors have safe anchorages and which are plagued by pirates, what gifts are appropriate for local chieftains, and the exact exchange rates for Roman silver coins in distant Indian markets. Through his pragmatic eyes, the abstract concept of a trade network snaps into sharp, tangible detail. We learn from the Periplus that a ship sailing from the Red Sea port of Berenice would first stop at Adulis, where the local ruler, Zoskales, was fluent in Greek and known for his fairness in trade. It lists the exports waiting there: ivory, tortoiseshell, and rhinoceros horn, and notes the imports desired: iron tools, cloth, and glassware. As the imagined voyage continues south along the African coast, the guide warns of dangerous shoals and describes the nomadic tribes who might trade for meat and grain. Then it pivots east across the open sea to India, providing the crucial sailing directions using the monsoon wind it calls Hippalus. The document names the great Emporia of Barygaza and Muziris, specifying the types of pepper, gemstones, and fine cottons available, and even notes the need for local pilots to navigate the treacherous river mouth leading to Barygaza. This is the network captured in mid-stride, a living system documented by someone whose livelihood depended on understanding its every current and eddy. The Periplus grounds our entire understanding in a concrete reality, transforming legends of ivory and incense into a documented, operational economy. It reveals a world already mature and highly organized, where a merchant from the Mediterranean could follow a set of written instructions and find himself, months later, bartering with Tamil guildsmen for a cargo that would make his fortune back home. This fragile papyrus scroll is our most direct link to the sounds, smells, and calculated gambles of that ancient global marketplace. The stories of the Periplus are not just words on papyrus, they are written in the earth itself. Across the scattered ruins of ancient ports, archaeologists have unearthed a silent but eloquent testimony, a material record of the connections we have been tracing. These are not grand temples or palaces, but the humble, everyday objects left behind, fragments that whisper of distant homes and long-concluded bargains. In the soil of South India, along the Malabar coast, the earth has yielded a startling treasure. At the site of Patanum, widely believed to be the location of the legendary port of Muziris, excavations have revealed a landscape transformed by trade. Digging through layers of time, researchers have found not just a few scattered artifacts, but a dense concentration of material from across the ocean. Most telling are the hundreds of Roman coins, a mix of silver denarii and gold aurae, minted by emperors from Augustus to Nero. This is not a casual loss, but a hoard, a purposeful accumulation of wealth that speaks to the immense scale of the exchange. These coins, struck in mints from Rome to Lyon, ended their journey buried in the silt of an Indian riverbank, a permanent deposit of the Silver River that flowed east to pay for pepper. Alongside the coins lie shattered amphorae, the distinctive ceramic containers used to transport Italian wine and olive oil across the seas. The very pottery used for dining in a Roman villa was unpacked on the docks of Muziris, its contents consumed by merchants far from home, and its broken pieces discarded into the Indian soil. This is concrete proof of the two-way flow, the physical presence of Roman traders living and working in the heart of the pepper country, their daily lives leaving a permanent imprint on a foreign shore. On the opposite side of the ocean, along the East African coast, the story repeats itself in reverse. At sites like the ancient port of Rapta, mentioned in the Periplus, and other settlements down the Swahili coast, archaeologists sift through layers to find objects that sailed with the monsoon from India. They uncover countless small, drawn glass beads in vibrant blues and greens, manufactured in centers like Arakamdu in South India. These beads were a form of currency and ornament, traded for African goods and worn by local elites as symbols of cosmopolitan connection. More substantial finds include fragments of Indian pottery, like the distinctive rouleted ware, a fine tableware with decorated rims that was a prized import. Finding these delicate Indian plates and bowls in an African coastal settlement is like finding a piece of someone's dinner set from thousands of miles away, a quiet, domestic clue to a global relationship. It tells us that the exchange was not just for kings and caravans, but filtered into daily life, that an African family might eat from a bowl made by a potter in Tamil Nadu, its journey across the sea adding to its value and its story. Perhaps the most profound material evidence, however, is not a traded object but a carved message. In the highlands of Ethiopia, near the ancient capital of Axum, stone inscriptions tell a tale of political and cultural entanglement. These are not in the native Ge'ez script, but in the elegant, angular letters of South Arabian. They record the deeds of early Axumite kings, their military campaigns, and their dedications to gods whose names are familiar from the pantheon of southern Arabia. One famous inscription, left by a king named Judeati, details his military activities across the Red Sea in the Arabian Peninsula itself. This is not the work of an isolated mountain kingdom, but of a regional power deeply involved in the politics and culture of its trading partners. The stone itself is local, but the language and the very concept of recording royal achievements in this monumental way were imports, absorbed and adapted through centuries of commercial and diplomatic contact. These inscriptions are frozen moments of conversation, proving that the ships carried more than goods. They carried the tools of statecraft, the means for one civilization to speak to another in a shared symbolic language. Together, this scattered evidence, coins in India, beads in Africa, and words in stone in Ethiopia, forms an irrefutable mosaic. It transforms the network from a historical idea into a tangible, physical reality, a world where a broken piece of pottery is a coordinates on a map of human connection. A king's power is often measured by the coins in his people's hands. Across the Indian Ocean world, the most common face stamped on metal was not that of a local ruler, but of a Roman emperor. In the markets of South Arabia and the ports of Western India, Roman silver and gold coins did not just circulate, they became the standard. Their widespread acceptance is a stunning fact of economic history, revealing a level of integration we rarely associate with antiquity. Local kingdoms did not reject this foreign currency, they embraced it because its purity and consistency were trusted from the Horn of Africa to the Bay of Bengal. This was a de facto common market where a merchant from Alexandria could land in Muziris and know the coins in his strongbox would be honored without question. But the story deepens with imitation. In South Arabia, the Himyarite kingdom began producing their own versions of Roman coins. These were not crude forgeries, but official issues that carefully copied the weight, size, and even the portrait of the reigning Roman emperor. Sometimes they overstruck Roman coins, imprinting their own marks on top of the imperial face. This was a brilliant economic strategy. By mimicking the trusted Roman standard, they ensured their own currency would flow smoothly in international trade, while also asserting a degree of local control over the money supply. In India, the pattern was similar. Local rulers, particularly in the south, hoarded Roman coins and sometimes used them as models for their own tribal issues. This numismatic echo tells a clear tale. The Roman denarius was the dollar of the ancient Indian Ocean. Its universal acceptance created a seamless financial layer over the diverse cultures of the network, greasing the wheels of commerce from one end of the known world to the other. Money became a silent, powerful language everyone agreed to speak. If coins tell the story of the marketplace, stone tells the story of the throne. Royal inscriptions carved into obelisks and stelae provide the political perspective. the boastful voice of kings who understood that trade was the foundation of their might. The most revealing of these voices belongs to King Azana of Axum. In the 4th century, after converting to Christianity, Azana erected monuments proclaiming his victories and his piety. But woven into these religious declarations is a detailed inventory of his economic and political reach. His inscriptions list the diverse peoples under his dominion, from the Barygaza of the coastal lowlands to the Aguizat of the interior. More importantly, they explicitly state that his rule extended over key trade routes and the peoples who controlled them. He does not merely say he is a great king, he catalogues the sources of his wealth, the very groups who supplied the ivory, gold, and aromatics that filled his treasury. This is a political manifesto written in stone, declaring that Axum's power was built on its successful management of a complex, multi-ethnic commercial network. The inscription is a snapshot of a kingdom at its zenith, using the control of luxury flows to bind together a small empire. It shows us that for rulers like Azana, trade was not a side venture for adventurous merchants, it was the core function of the state. His ability to project power, to build those monumental stelae, and to mint his own gold coins, all stemmed from his capacity to tax, protect, and dominate the movement of precious things. The stone gives us the king's own words, framing the entire bustling, chaotic network of ships and markets as a deliberate engine of royal authority. In his boast, we hear the confident voice of globalization's ancient architect. The origins of this entire network may lie in a place that vanished from the map. For the pharaohs of ancient Egypt, one source of luxury stood above all others, a distant, almost mythical realm they called the land of Punt. Egyptian records, carved in stone and painted on temple walls, describe it with a sense of awe. Expeditions would return from Punt laden with treasures that sound strikingly familiar. Heaps of fragrant myrrh and frankincense resin, ebony wood, leopard skins, sacks of gold dust, and most famously, living myrrh trees to be replanted in Egypt. They also brought a strange and wondrous substance, electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver. For over 1,000 years, from the Old Kingdom into the New Kingdom, Egypt sent royal missions to this fabled land. The most famous voyage, commissioned by Queen Hatshepsut around 1470 BCE, is depicted in vivid detail on the walls of her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri. The scenes show Egyptian ships being loaded with these exotic goods, and with something even more curious, diplomatic gifts exchanged between equals. The ruler of Punt, a figure named Parahu, and his wife, Ati, are depicted with a dignity and detail rarely afforded to foreigners, suggesting Punt was not a conquered territory, but a powerful and respected trading partner. Then, after the reign of Ramesses III, the voyages stopped. Punt faded from Egyptian records, becoming a memory, then a legend. Its actual location was lost, swallowed by the sands of time and the silence of the historical record. This disappearance created one of Egyptology's most enduring puzzles. Where was the land of Punt? For over a century, scholars have debated two primary candidates, each with compelling evidence that ties directly to the later Indian Ocean network we have been exploring. The first and most popular theory places Punt in the Horn of Africa, likely in the region spanning modern-day Eritrea, Djibouti, and northern Somalia. The evidence here is ecological. The goods described, especially the frankincense and myrrh trees, thrive in the arid climates of the Horn. The animals depicted in the reliefs, like giraffes, baboons, and leopards, are distinctly African. The geography described in Egyptian texts mentions a voyage south down the Red Sea, then a journey inland, which aligns with reaching the African coast. Furthermore, the physical features of the Puntites as shown by the Egyptians, their hairstyles, body ornaments, and the prominent portrayal of Ati, the queen with a Stelae figure, are interpreted by many as clear representations of African peoples. This theory suggests Punt was not a centralized kingdom, but a coastal region or a series of allied chiefdoms that controlled the lucrative incense trade from the African side of the Red Sea, making it the direct prehistoric precursor to kingdoms like Axum. The alternative theory argues for a location in southern Arabia, in what is now Yemen or Oman. Proponents point to the fact that the finest frankincense in the ancient world came from southern Arabia's Dhow region. They note that the Egyptians sometimes used the term God's land interchangeably for Punt and for mountainous regions to the east. The voyage to Punt is described in some texts as going to the terraces of incense, a phrase that could match the terraced agriculture of Yemen's highlands. Some scholars also suggest that the exchange depicted was so sophisticated, involving such large quantities of incense, that it must have been with the organized, temple-centered kingdoms that archaeology confirms existed in South Arabia during this period. The debate is far from settled. Each piece of evidence can be read in multiple ways. The animals could have been gifts acquired by Arabian traders from Africa. The voyage descriptions could be metaphorical or follow routes we no longer fully understand. What this mystery ultimately reveals is that the long-distance exchange of luxuries between Africa and Arabia is far older than the classical Indian Ocean network. It stretches back into the mists of the Bronze Age, a time when Egypt, one of the world's first superpowers, was already dependent on a fragile supply chain stretching hundreds of miles across water and desert for the substances that defined its religion and royalty. The search for Punt is more than a geographical puzzle. It is a search for the very first link in a chain of desire that would, centuries later, bind continents together. The fact that we still cannot say with certainty where it was only deepens its power, reminding us that some of the most important places in history are not points on a map, but ideas in the mind, destinations built from rumor, need, and the glittering promise of things just beyond the horizon. Even the most resilient networks are reshaped by the tides of time. The intricate web that linked Africa, Arabia, and India for centuries did not suddenly snap, but it underwent a profound transformation, its currents shifting with the rise of new empires and the slow, relentless pressure of environmental change. The first major tremor came from the heart of the Mediterranean itself. The Roman Empire, that insatiable engine of demand for Eastern luxuries, fractured. By the 4th and 5th centuries, the western half of the empire crumbled under political and military pressures, while the eastern half evolved into the Byzantine Empire, centered on Constantinople. This was more than a political rebranding, it was an economic reorientation. The Byzantine Empire, while still wealthy, was more financially strained and militarily preoccupied, first with the Sasanian Persians to its east and later with emerging powers in Europe. Its appetite for Indian Ocean luxuries remained, but the sheer volume of silver coin flowing eastward began to diminish. The river of Roman silver that had flooded Indian ports and funded so much of the network's peak activity slowed to a stream. This economic shift forced merchants and kingdoms to adapt, seeking new patrons and recalibrating their routes. At the same time, the balance of power across the Red Sea entered a period of intense rivalry. The Axumite kingdom, long the dominant African power in the trade, found itself facing a formidable and ambitious competitor, the Himyarite kingdom of southern Arabia. For centuries, Axum and Himyar had been commercial partners and occasional rivals, but in the 6th century, their conflict escalated into open warfare and religious struggle. Himyar, which had converted to Judaism, and Christian Axum became proxies in a wider contest between the Byzantine and Sasanian Persian empires. Axum launched major military expeditions across the Red Sea, temporarily occupying parts of the Himyarite territory. This was not a simple border skirmish, it was a fight for control over the very throat of the trade routes, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait and the ports that fed the incense and spice commerce. The conflict destabilized the region, making the sea lanes less secure and disrupting the steady rhythm of the monsoonal exchange. The rivalry consumed resources and attention that had once been devoted to maintaining the peaceful infrastructure of trade, introducing a new layer of political risk for every merchant Dhow sailing between the continents. Beneath these political storms, a quieter, more inexorable change was taking root in the very landscape that had created such wealth. The legendary frankincense and myrrh groves of southern Arabia were not infinite. Centuries of intensive harvesting, coupled with gradual climatic shifts toward greater aridity, began to strain the delicate ecosystems that supported the precious trees. While not causing an immediate collapse, this environmental pressure likely reduced yields over the long term, making the incense trade slightly less lucrative and more vulnerable to disruption. The kingdoms built on this fragrant foundation had to diversify or face a slow erosion of their economic base. This subtle decline in a core commodity mirrored the broader transformation. The world was changing, and the pillars of the old luxury network were being weathered by new realities. The most significant reorientation came with the rapid spread of Islam in the 7th and 8th centuries. This was not merely a religious revolution, but a political and economic earthquake that redrew the map of Eurasia. The new Islamic caliphates, first the Umayyad and then the Abbasid, unified a vast territory from Spain to the borders of India. This created a massive, integrated economic zone where goods, ideas, and people could move with unprecedented freedom under a single political and legal system. The center of gravity for global trade shifted decisively eastward to brilliant new cities like Baghdad and later Cairo. Crucially, the focus of long-distance commerce also began to pivot. While the Indian Ocean routes remained vital, there was an increasing emphasis on the Central Asian Silk Road connections to China and the burgeoning maritime routes deeper into Southeast Asia and the Spice Islands. The Western Indian Ocean Circuit, our triangle between Africa, Arabia, and India, was no longer the sole or primary axis of global exchange. It became one important spoke in a much larger wheel. Ports like Suraf on the Persian Gulf and later Kilwa on the Swahili coast rose to prominence, reflecting these new alignments. The old network did not die. It was absorbed, adapted, and expanded by a new civilization that built upon its foundations while charting different courses. So, did this magnificent network vanish? The answer is a definitive no. It evolved. The patterns of exchange, the navigational knowledge, the cosmopolitan ports, all these legacies were inherited and transformed by the new Islamic world and by the resilient kingdoms that endured. Axum gradually receded from its imperial heights, but Ethiopian Christianity, born from that era of exchange, flourished in the highlands. The Swahili city-states of East Africa, with their stone mosques and coral houses, became the new African anchors of a continued Indian Ocean trade, now deeply entwined with the Islamic world. The demand for luxuries never ceased. It simply found new pathways and new cultural expressions. The story is not one of an ending, but of a metamorphosis where the connections first forged for ivory and incense became the channels for faith, language, and a different kind of global order, proving that even when empires fall, the routes they create often outlive them, waiting for the next chapter to be written. This network reveals a truth we are only now fully appreciating. For over half a millennium, a sophisticated system of globalization thrived across the Indian Ocean, a web of economic and cultural exchange that predated the more famous Silk Road by centuries. This was not a fleeting moment of contact, but an enduring, resilient structure that shaped continents. Its legacy is written in the DNA of the modern world around that vast sea. The cosmopolitan ports gave rise to enduring diasporic communities, whose descendants still carry blended traditions, languages, and faiths. The shared cultural foundations laid down during this era, from architectural styles to legal concepts and artistic motifs, created a recognizable Indian Ocean world, a coherent region bound by a common history of connection long before European ships arrived. This ancient network provided the essential template, the proven routes, the navigational knowledge, and the commercial practices that later Islamic caliphates and eventually European trading companies would desperately seek to control and replicate. They were not inventing global trade, they were stepping onto a stage that had been set and illuminated for over 1,000 years. Recognizing this history fundamentally challenges a narrow, Eurocentric narrative of economic history. It moves the story of early globalization from the Mediterranean and the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean, and it restores agency to the African, Arabian, and Indian kingdoms who were not passive recipients of foreign influence, but the primary architects, financiers, and beneficiaries of this interconnected world. They built the system, set its rules, and reaped its rewards, their ambitions literally moving mountains of luxury across the water. To understand this is to see our shared past with greater clarity and richness. If this story of ancient connections has sparked your curiosity, you will find links in the description to explore related topics, from the rock-hewn churches of Axum to the lost port of Muziris. The journey of discovery is just beginning.